Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, my name is Cindy Coleman, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Cindy. Does somebody have a watch I can borrow? Rolex? I'd like to thank Ron and the committee for inviting me to come share with you. You have to excuse me, I'm having hot flashes. Just never thought I'd live this long. – 20 degrees and I'm dying of heat. I'm an Eskimo from San Bernardino. And there aren't a lot of us, and there are none now. The other half is German and Irish. So you can probably guess I don't drink very well. I hated San Bernardino. It was an ugly, hot, smoggy, horrible place to live. And it's so ugly, a couple weeks ago it burst into flames. This Eskimo equipment up there makes me homesick, though. Chuck C. used to say something that I loved. He said, I could not integrate myself into society. And the first time I heard him say that, it just washed over me with such comfort, because that's the way I felt. I just could not make myself fit. I felt so out of place everywhere. And I am hyper aware of how I'm doing at every moment. Just go ahead and ask me. And I have the kind of personality that I need whiskey, and I need a lot of it. I'm a little intense and uptight. I heard someone talking about, they were actually talking about their Al-Anon mother, but she described her as being someone who just laid on the couch, pinched, you know. And I understand that pinched feeling. When I'm sober, I'm pinched. I am restless, irritable, and discontent. And for some reason, alcohol does something wonderful for me. And what it does for you is even better. I like the idea of people. And even now in my morning meditation, I feel so spiritual, but when I encounter my first human being, it's gone. And I've always been this way. And I'm a lot better than I used to be. That's for sure. My father is an alcoholic, and he was a practicing alcoholic while I was growing up. He's the German Irish. My mom left before I was 3 years old and went back to Alaska, where she lives now. So I was raised by my dad with two of my brothers, one 18 and a half months younger and one 18 and a half months older. And I just was a real tomboy. Played a lot of sports, real athletic. I did really well in school without trying at all. And I remember my childhood actually being pretty good overall. I loved my father and my brothers. Oh, I didn't see her there. You. My maiden name was supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. My dad drank Gallo red wine and Brew 102. So I come from a real high-class family. And I love Southern Comfort. And I love Old English 800. I love them together. I love them on my Captain Crunch with Crunch Berries. And I probably threw up every single time that I drank. And oddly enough, some people get so sick once that they never drink again. I got sick almost every single time, but it's okay. You just throw up and you feel better and you can drink more. And it's just part of the evening. See, what can I tell you about growing up in San Bernardino? My grandmother was kind of my mother figure, and she was just a good Baptist woman, a woman of deep faith, and she just died a few months ago, 89 years old, never had a sip of booze in her life. And I don't know if you know anything about Baptists, but we downplay words a lot. And she used to call me a handful. But I just drove her crazy. I drove her insane. I drove everybody insane around me. I couldn't sit still, and I just fidgety and talk, and go. I have very little gray area. I'm like 0 or 100, and in between takes about 18 seconds. So I was just hardwired. I needed alcohol. I didn't do drugs, really. I kind of got sober before they became really popular, and they just scared me. I took amphetamines for 2 weeks once because someone gave them to me for free. And he was a good businessman. That's how he got his clientele. He gave them to you for free until you were hooked, and then he said, you've got to start paying for these. But when you feel like mowing the lawn at 2 o'clock in the morning with flashlight and scissors, I don't like that feeling. I'm not a real active drunk. I just love to sit around and weep. I want to throw my arms around you and tell you what you mean to me. I want to talk about the meaning of the universe. I'm a great philosopher while drunk. And I can just weep for hours and hours about how much I love you. I'm what Hank J. used to call an emotional goober. And I was in a gang when I was drinking. I'm sure you've heard of us, the Seven Leafers. And they kicked me out of the gang. Now, the reason they kicked me out is because I'm more gang-like when I'm sober than when I'm drinking. And they couldn't keep me from drinking. they'd be beating people up, and then I'd go throw my arms around them and rock them and tell them how much I loved them. So they ousted me. I remember looking at the 20 questions, and one of the questions on that list is, did you seek lower companions? And that was one of the few that I checked no, because I looked up to Speedy, Spike, and Spider. And my dad was a probation officer. And he handled drunk driving cases. And he was sending all of his clients to AA, and he decided one afternoon that he should go to an AA meeting and find out what it's about. And he's been sober 29 years now. Then my hell really began. We left San Bernardino, moved to Riverside. The last stepmother and her kids moved out. We had a few empty bedrooms. So what my dad did was, there were no homeless back in the 70s because my father took them all in, is what happened. He would just go down to the local Alano Club, and whoever didn't have a place to live came and lived with us. So we had my newcomer father, 3 practicing teenage alcoholics, and a rotating series of newcomers living in our home. So it was a very interesting household. There was increasing animosity in our family as time passed. My little brother and I got in about a half a dozen fistfights a week usually. We always had bloody lips and black eyes, bloody noses. And my older brother, he was kind of a one-punch kind of guy. He was real slow to anger. We'd have to work him over for a few weeks, but he would just punch us once, and we'd fly across the room, and that would be it. And part of the problem with this was when I started seeing things that weren't there, my older brother would punch me in the face so that I could see clearly. That was his way of working with others. And I started to see things that weren't really there. So I just got real quiet at the end of my drinking because I couldn't really tell what was real and what wasn't anymore. And one night, my dad's AA sponsor brought over a gunny sack full of dead, plucked ducks. And my dad filled the bathtub up with cold water, flung the ducks in there. And I guess I had been drinking a little bit that night. And I went in the bathroom to vomit. And something kind of caught the corner of my eye. And it kind of looked like they were ducks. But they were real relaxed. So I just washed my face and walked out, and there was my older brother, who didn't say anything, and neither did I. And the next night we had duck for dinner. I felt much better. I was the kind of kid that you don't want your kid to hang out with. I was put on restriction for life. I'd come sneak your kid out of their bedroom window. We'd go to a party. Most of the time, managed to get your kid back home and buzz the doorbell and run. But every once in a while, I'd forget to run. Little details were escaping me, and I just was getting in a lot of trouble. My brothers were starting to get in trouble. They were drinking. My dad, like any good newcomer, quit his job and didn't work for a year. And he got his first job at Kellogg Mental Institution, graveyard shift, running the adolescent unit. So it was wonderful. He went to an AA meeting every night, and then from the AA meeting, he went to work. So he's gone from about 7:30 in the evening until about 8:30 the next morning. So we had a party at our house every night. And he was going crazy with us. As a result of his working the steps, he made amends to my mother. And like I told you, she left before I was 3. I don't have any memory of her and didn't actually meet her until I was 16. But he made amends to her, and we were driving him crazy. So he went to go talk to Chuck C. to find out what to do about these 3 insane teenage alcoholics that he had. And he said, "You'd better release them." So my father interpreted that to, he should send us to Alaska to go live with our mother, which I love that whole concept. I'm sorry, making amends. Here's your 3 rotten kids. Shortly after that discussion about us being sent away, I forgot to mention, I went to a couple of Alateen meetings, literally 2 Alateen meetings, and they kicked me out and asked me to not come back because I showed up drunk both times. But the only thing I remember from Alateen was David. David had long blonde hair down to the middle of his back, played the drums, smoked Marlboros, everything I wanted in a man. And that's what I remembered from Alateen. I had by now tried several different churches. I was getting sent away to youth camps for troubled teens and just a bunch of different answers. My friends were just burnt out. They didn't like hanging out with me anymore. And I had one girlfriend that I remember, and she used to ask me, she said, "Well, why don't you just drink the way that I do?" And in the beginning, I had all kinds of reasons why I didn't drink the way that she did. And I had probably a moment of clarity once when she asked me, and she said, "Why don't you just drink like I do?" And I looked at her and I said, "I don't know." And I honestly didn't know why I couldn't drink like she did. And I knew there was something wrong with me. One night, my dad sat me down. I had been drunk for a few days straight. He told me that he didn't have to work that particular evening and that he was going to take David to an AA meeting. And David was that young man I'd met in Alateen, and he was now a newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I asked him, I said, why are you doing that? He said, "David's an alcoholic." I said, "Oh, God, I'm sorry." He said, "Why don't you join us? We're going to go hear a man named Chuck talk, and Chuck hasn't had a drink in 30 years. And I said, "Why?" I mean, I couldn't imagine why you want to go listen to somebody who hasn't had a drink in 30 years. I could think of many other things that I would rather do. So he invited me to that AA meeting. I had been to an AA meeting once before to give my dad his birthday cake, and the only thing I remember from that meeting was someone, besides giving my dad the cake, was someone got a white plastic chip for staying sober 30 days. And I remember thinking, what a ripoff. 30 whole days, and you get a white plastic chip. That's what I remember from that meeting. So when my dad invited me to go hear Chuck, I didn't want to go. 2 girls came over that night that I hadn't seen in a while, and they brought a fifth of Southern Comfort. And we were sitting around the living room talking about how things were going to be different. And I don't know if I used exactly those words, but I never meant to get as carried away as I did, which I did over and over and over. Things were a little different. We actually drank out of glasses, you know, those old Ronald McDonald glasses they used to make. We even threw a couple ice cubes in. And I drank mine. I drank what was in the bottle. And the way I remember it is, you know, if you're not done with yours by the time I'm done with mine, I'm rightfully entitled to yours. And I grabbed this girl's half a glass of whiskey, and I knew I couldn't hold it and sit down at the same time, so I carefully placed it on this arm of this couch and this chair that were next to each other. And as I sat down, I knocked it over. I always hear moans when I talk about that. And I just started sobbing. I mean, that was the last of the booze. Now, I was not based anywhere near reality. It didn't dawn on me I could get more or steal more or somebody would bring more. That was just the last of it, and I was just crying so hard. I went into a blackout that night that lasted 3 days, and I came out of it for a few minutes, a few different times. What I remember before going into it, though, was I was overcome by a sense of love for my little brother. And I needed to go find him and tell him how much he meant to me. And I knew he was 2 blocks away over at the college where he hung out with the security guards, smoking pot, while they drove around and looked for illegal activity. And while I was out there, they were there. And they had a cannon this time, and they kept firing this cannon at me over and over and over again. And it's kind of an odd sensation, but I was so drunk I didn't feel pain, but I felt particles inside my face. So I kept wiping my face. There were little chips of rock and glass coming out and little streams of blood. And the second I would get it wiped off, they'd fire another load at me. And I'd found out later what was happening was I was just climbing up a real steep hill. And with my dead drunken weight, I just kept going face down into the ground over and over and over. So they finally got me up the hill. We were in the alley behind my house, and there was my little brother and his best friend. And they were lying against the garbage cans. And their shirts were ripped, and they had chains wrapped around their necks, and what appeared to be blood all over the place. And my little brother's best friend's brother was standing there, and he said the gang came by and took care of him. I just started sobbing again. And after a minute or so, I don't know how long it was, I was in a blackout, so this is what they were telling me. After a minute or so, they hopped up and said, "Ha ha, we're kidding." But you can't take grief away from an alcoholic. And I was into this. So I'm still sobbing because I still think he's dead. And now they're shaking me and they're eating the ketchup. And I still think he's dead. So they take me in the house where my older brother is, who then starts to punch me in the face so that I can see clearly. And I just did what I often did. I just took off my clothes and started throwing up. So they threw me in my bedroom and closed the door. I had eaten that night, and I hadn't eaten for a little while, and I had spaghetti. My father came home that night feeling real spiritual. Just heard Chuck C., just took a newcomer. Life was great. He comes into the house where all these loaded teenagers are and asks where I am, and they said she went to bed, she's got a headache. So he went into my room to give me a kiss goodnight. I guess he had been reading The Family afterward. And they threw this teenage barricade up in front of my bedroom door and tried to prevent him from entering, and he finally made his way through. And he saw me lying there in my sea of pasta and my eyeballs rolling in the back of my head. And I was completely white for the first time in my life. I heard that it didn't look that good. And he carried me out into the living room and asked these kids what's wrong with her. He thought I had tried to commit suicide. He thought I'd taken a bunch of pills. And I already told you I don't do drugs really because they're dangerous and they can kill you. So he's asking these kids what's wrong with her, and they said she's got a headache. So he threw me in the car, rushed me over to Riverside Community Hospital. We got there, they started to pump my stomach, and I did it for myself. all over my father and the doctor. And I sat up and I said, "Oh, F, I'm drunk again." And I just passed back out. Now, I looked like I had been terribly beaten up because of this walk I had gone on and because of my brother's help. And the doctor just looked at my father and said, "Mr. Stucked-Up, I'm sorry, but we're going to put a 72-hour hold on your daughter. She's obviously trying to kill herself, and she's not far away from doing that. And we're going to send her over to Kellogg Mental Institution. They've got a great adolescent unit there." My dad said, "I know, I run it," and asked if he could bring me home. Now, the next morning, I came to for a few minutes to what sounded like a really loud storm, and it was just my dad slowly backing out of the driveway. And he was going down to the local Alano Club, which is where he hung out when things went wrong, and things went wrong often in our home. And I knew something was off because I was laying in clean sheets. My hair was really crunchy, and everything in me hurt. And I just dropped to the floor, and I crawled out to the living room and where all these kids were, and they told me what had happened the night before. Somehow, I got into the kitchen, and they dialed the phone for me, and I called down to the Alano Club, and my dad got on the phone, and he came home and he talked to me. I don't know what he said. The gist of it was that I had to go to AA if I was going to live in his house, and I was too tired to fight. I mean, the fight was out of me. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "You got to take a shower." And I said, "I can't." And I remember he just put me in the bottom of the shower, and I was told that the first 2 days sober that I slept in the bathroom with my head wrapped around the toilet bowl or up on it. And what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous is that sometimes the worst day of your life is really the best day of your life. And that was the worst day of my life, because I remember somewhere in the course of that 2 days, my dad picking my face up off the toilet seat. And he was pouring milk or buttermilk down me. I don't know what they used to give us for nourishment, but I just threw it right back up again. And I looked up at him, and he just had tears coming down his face. And he didn't say anything, and I couldn't. And I remember he just put my face back down on the toilet seat. And I knew that I had to live the rest of my life like that, however long it was, because I didn't know how not to drink, and I didn't seem to be able to control it once I started. The next time I came to, I was talking to David on the telephone. David was the Alateen guy. He was about 9 days sober now, and just extremely nauseating. He had the 12 steps memorized, and he said, "You know, alcoholism is the disease of self-admission, and you have to admit it to your innermost self that you're an alcoholic. And when you do that, your recovery begins." He says, "Nobody will tell you that you're an alcoholic when you go to the meeting, but in your case, I'm telling you, you're an alcoholic." And he said, "My mother and I are going to come pick you up and take you to an AA meeting." And I said, "I'm too sick." And I believe literally I was too physically ill that night. I went back into the blackout. The next time I came to was on a Monday night. And my dad was shoving me in the back of this Chevy Nova, and they were taking me from Riverside to Pomona to the Triangle Club for my first meeting. And I sat in the back of that meeting, and I was just vomiting. I was shaking. They kept bringing me full cups of coffee, and I kept knocking them over. Someone said, "You can sit on your hands." I remember that. I don't remember what anybody said during the meeting. I remember after the meeting, a lady named Martha came up and she talked to me, and Martha was beautiful. She had long blonde hair, and she had makeup on, and she had a soft voice. She was clean. She'd probably showered that very day. And that's what I remember from my first meeting was Martha. And I didn't hear it. I'm sure it was said, but I don't remember hearing it. But it was a surprise to me that you guys don't even smoke pot. Because I thought, how else do you stay sober if you can't smoke pot? So they made me change my sobriety date. That's the date I have now, March 10th of 1977. And don't clap. I got sober 2 months before my 16th birthday. So you don't have to do the math. I'm sober 26 years. I'm 42 years old. No clapping, just cash. But believe me, it was not my life's dream to be sober 26 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. Boy, I could think about a lot of other things I'd rather be doing. And when I hear people say, oh, you're so lucky to get here, I just wanted to just, gouge their eyes out. I think, oh, great, I have to spend the rest of my life in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, the odd thing with me is when you take alcohol away, I'm left with everything that drove me to drink in the first place. One of the popular psychology terms now is issues. I only had one, and it was called sobriety. I just couldn't do it. I am stark raving sober when I'm sober. And I am like Dr. Silkworth describes in the big book, restless, irritable, and discontent unless I can get that ease and comfort which comes at once with taking a few drinks. And I went to a lot of AA meetings. I went to at least one a day, sometimes two a day, sometimes 3 meetings a day, my first 2 years probably. I had a slight attitude problem. I've not always been the delicate flower that you see before you. And I got kicked out of a couple of high schools sober. I had one feeling that floated through my consciousness, and it was the feeling that I've got to go now. So I'd pack up my box and I'd go. And I guess I was about 1.5 years sober. I don't recall how long, close to 2 years sober. And I finally figured out what was just killing me. It was the fast pace of LA. That's what was doing it. So I packed up my box and moved to Oregon. And I got there, and it was blue, crisp, beautiful. And my head just got louder and louder. And I remember looking around and thinking, God, I hate nature. I had gotten a job at Sambo's as a waitress. And I wasn't real people-oriented at this stage in my sobriety. So I'd stand there with my arms folded, kind of cock my head a little, tap my foot, say, what do you want? They'd say, pancakes. I'd come back with a stack of pancakes. But, they were so demanding. They'd say, excuse me, but can I have some butter and syrup? I'd say, you didn't ask for butter and syrup. Because I couldn't put 2 and 2 together. If it didn't apply to me personally, I just didn't think about it. So they found it necessary to let me go. Wasn't making a lot of tips. So I hopped in my 68 Ford Fairlane station wagon where the window didn't roll up. Drove back to Los Angeles. I was about 2 years sober. I had 9 sponsors in my first 2 years. came back to my home group, the Pacific group, that I had been in since I was 3 months sober. And just more angry and obnoxious and hostile than I had ever been. And a guy named Tom said, "Why don't you go ask that lady named Pat at the door to be your sponsor?" I said, "Great idea." I wasn't going to do it, but I was just, blowing him off. But he walked me over to her and said, "Pat, Cindy has something to ask you." So I asked her, and she told me to come talk to her after the meeting, and she told me that she would sponsor me under certain conditions, that I made a commitment to a home group, to Alcoholics Anonymous, and would take her direction. And I said, okay. I knew I'd be gone in 3 months anyway. So I just said yes, and I don't know what was different with Pat, but it started to work. So she was sponsor number 10. I was crazy, prime relationship material. So the second his girlfriend went to Hawaii, I made my move. She was an Al-Anon. I figured she could just release him. So Clancy's my sponsor now, sponsor number 11. And he's been my sponsor for almost 23 years. But he used to tell me that I was addicted to excitement. God, what are all these beats? Because I love the feeling of falling in love. All is right with the world. You work the 12 golden steps. You get to the meeting and glance at them from across the room. But if you're like me, at some point, the bliss lifts. And then they say something that's just kind of irritating. And I would get a sign from God that says, break up with him. I do God's will. If you're new and you're getting signs from God, run them through your sponsor. But then I would have the delicious feeling of a broken heart.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
You know, your gut is just churning. Your heart is ripping. You listen to sad songs on the way to the meeting. Get there and glance at him from across the room. Show him what he can't have. Because you never look better than when you're broken up. But if you're like me, at some point, the pain lifts. It always, 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 I promise you, it goes away. So I'd get another sign from God that said, get back together. So we did this about 18 times. Give our group something to do, help them get out of themselves. And after we did this for about 5 years, he went out and got loaded. Fortunately for me, I had something a little bit stronger than my obsession for him, and that was my commitment to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had been taking the actions long enough that I just continued to take the actions. And I went to a lot of meetings, and I called my sponsor and had dinner with the women and helped new people. And it was a rough time. After about a year, he came back to Alcoholics Anonymous. We started glancing at each other from across the room, and I got pregnant. which thrilled our sponsor, Clancy, to no end. So he said, that we were going to have dinner, and he said, all right, you're getting married next Wednesday before the meeting. And I said, I'm too sick, to even shop for a wedding dress, my white virginal wedding dress. And anyway, so he gave us 13 days. But I had always hated children. I'd hear them cry in restaurants, and I would think, God, why don't they just smack that thing? So I was real nervous as to what kind of mother I would become. And so was everybody who knew me. But I remember one Friday night, I was sitting in an AA meeting. I was about 4.5 months pregnant, and I felt this ripple go down my stomach. I don't know if you've seen the movie Alien, but I kind of let out a scream. And then an odd thing happened. I just started falling in love. I just was in love with this baby, and I couldn't wait to meet him. And I remember September 23rd, I went into labor, and John, my husband, called the Lamaze list, which consisted of all the AA people we knew. So I had AA people coming in and out of my labor room all night long. I was laying there trying to look good. And 16 and a half short hours later, Daniel was born. And when he was born, he was screaming his head off. And the first thought that crossed my mind was, let me hold him so I can make him feel better. And I'd never felt that way about anything. And I love being a mother now. And that's because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll tell you, it's not from any virtue on my part. I guess when Daniel was about a year old, John started drinking and using again. And he never put any sobriety together after that again. He'd get 2 months and 4 months and 3 months. And I was about 12 and a half years sober and left that marriage. And to that point, it was the worst time in my sobriety. It was an awful divorce and terrible custody battle. And again, I was in one of those places where the worst day of your life turns out to be the best day of your life, because I had gotten to a place where it talks about in the big book, and I'm totally paraphrasing, but exhausting self-will and human resources. And it says when we do that, we can then affect a conscious contact with God as we understand Him. And it started a whole new relationship with my Creator that I don't think I would have otherwise done. After the divorce, a little bit later, I moved to Iowa and went to school, which is something I had dreamed about, and just applied the principles that I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. I sat in the front, thanked the professor for sharing, showed up on time, did my homework. And the last summer while we were out there, John died. He overdosed, choked on his vomit, and it was right before our son's 11th birthday. And that was rough to get through. It's interesting how the disease of alcoholism is so strong. And I just watched it eat this man piece by piece. And the last time I saw him alive, there was just a hint of the man that I once knew. Eric Butterworth is a minister. I don't know from what church or whatever, but I read this in a book once, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, "The past does not exist except held by the thoughts in my own mind." And I love that, because to me, that's what the steps do for me. They free me from the past. Some aspects of my childhood were not ideal, but I think overall it was pretty great, you know. I never felt abandoned by my mother. And I imagine if I went and got analyzed, they would say she abandoned me. And she's a practicing alcoholic. I look at it now and I think God spared me. And she's in my life today, and I love her dearly. And she's in my life because of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sponsor made me write her once a month, which I did not want to do. My favorite was looking for the Mother's Day cards. You know, thanks for being there all those years. When Clancy was my sponsor, I called him about 4 to 12 times a day. And not for like a rough period that I was going through, or, you know, like that time of the month. But I did it for about 3 years straight, because I was just insane. I'm someone who has always made lifetime decisions based on my emotions. And to come here and find out that that's not what I do anymore, it's a different way of living. Our book talks about being rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence. And, you know, I had always lived in the cravings of my body or the obsessions of my mind or being prey to my emotional nature. And now I'm on a different footing. And that came to me through sponsorship, is how it came. And I had the good fortune, I told you my mother is back in my life, and I got to go up to Alaska, and we went back to the village that she grew up in, which is Unalakleet on the coast below the Arctic Circle. And there were about 700 people in that village. Not very many teeth, but that was such a wonderful gift to be able to go up there. And I loved it. My mother is number 9 of 21 children. Long winter nights. And I was over at kid number 2's house, who was 81 at the time. He turned 82 before we left. But he had caribou antlers hanging up on his wall, and there was scrimshaw in it. And, you know, there was a polar bear carved on it, and the words, "one day at a time." So I asked my uncle, I said, "Oh, one day at a time." I said, "That's an AA slogan." He said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, is there an AA meeting here?" He said, "Once a week at the Catholic Church, but nobody goes." I said, "Well, you know, we don't really call it an AA meeting, you know, unless there are alcoholics there." He said, "Oh, no, it's there. Just nobody goes." And there's an interesting logic there. When I went, it was summer solstice, so the sun didn't set. So we were like touring at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I remember telling one of my billions of cousins, I said, "Yeah, I couldn't go to sleep. You know, I had a rough time sleeping, and I was so tired." He said, "You weren't tired." I said, "Yeah, I was tired. I just couldn't fall asleep." He said, "If you were tired, you would have slept." And I always thought feelings were facts, you know. I felt tired, but apparently I wasn't. And eventually I went to sleep. I used to hear people say from the podium, oh, and I want to thank the women that I sponsor, and I just love them so much. And I would just go, oh, God. One of my sponsors, I don't remember which one it was, number 6 or whatever, used to tell me that I had to get up and go shake hands around the meeting to get out of myself. And I said, I don't want to. She said, well, if you don't, they're going to die. I said, they're going to die anyway. She said, well, if you don't do it, you're going to die. I warmed up a little, but... And she says, all right, well, if you don't go do it, she said, you might drink and continue to live. And I got up and I was like, hi, Pam. Hi, Sally. Hi, Mary. And I have the kind of personality now. I'm sober long enough to know, just based on experience, that the absolute best thing that I can do is work with another alcoholic. And there are times when I am still so up in my head that I just want the phone to ring and have somebody call me with a problem. Coupled with that, I have the kind of personality that gets irritated every time the phone rings. The only thing I've never been obsessed with is what can I do for you? And I have a disease that says my very life depends on my constant thought of others and how I might help meet their needs. I mean, that's like a joke. But I've learned to take actions here, and the truth is now I love the women that I sponsor. They are such a blessing in my life. They're my sanity. And I love to see what AA does to us here. I have a great degree of freedom that I didn't have when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I actually didn't have for a number of years. And wow, they're getting louder. 5 months ago, I married a man with fluctuating luck. Some days he knows he's the luckiest man in the world. Then there are those days where he knows he should have been a lot nicer in his last life. And Clancy sponsors both of us. I haven't killed him off yet, though. But my life is so good today. I can tell you, if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, in one sentence, something that just tells you everything. And that is, I was crazy. And I'm not crazy like that. Intermittently, I am. But I'm not crazy like that anymore. I remember when I moved to Iowa and I didn't know a living soul out there, and my son and I moved, and someone said to me, aren't you going to be lonely? And I said, I don't remember the last time I was lonely. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous filled with loneliness and despair. I'll tell you this one little story and then sit down. I don't know if you've seen the trilogy Star Wars, but I'm the kind of person where I love to watch the same movie over and over and over again. That's another thing I loved about Hank J's talk. He'd talk about playing the records and hitting that same trumpet toot over and over, because it just moved him. That's what I like to do with movies. There's something calming about it to me, to see the same thing over and over. And I had my son watch this Star Wars trilogy, and there's a little guy, a little character in there. He kind of looks like a trash can, R2-D2. And he just bleeps and whistles all the time. But he has a guy that interprets for him, C-3PO. C-3PO is that brass-colored droid, fluent in over 6,000 languages. And my son and I were sitting in the parking lot in Iowa after his dad died, and he just looked at me and he said, you know, he says, my dad was kind of like R2-D2, but he didn't have a C-3PO. And that kind of describes my experience here in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I can come here with all my bleeps and whistles that don't make sense, and you guys interpret them for me and give me marching orders so I can go back out into society and I can integrate. And I am an ingrate most of the time. I don't know why. I wish I were more surrendered than I am, but I just am an ingrate. And I get gratitude, like the big book says, fleeting and soon lost. But I never feel better than when I'm talking to another alcoholic. And that I've been able to live this life for 26 years is such a blessing. So if you're new, get a sponsor, get a home group. We're listening to some tapes on the way up here, my husband and I were, and Chuck C. was talking about completely giving ourselves to this simple program. And it's a simple program. But to completely give myself, you know, fortunately, alcohol beat me down enough so that I was able to do that for at least 26 years. Thank you for my life.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.